Mr. Macpherson, I understand that you would wish to be called Alec.
I don't mind, whatever.
But I think you may find that Council will call you Mr. Macpherson.
Fine.
We'll see how it goes. Mary will ask you to take the oath.
You want me to stand?
As you wish. Please state your full name.
Alexander Mitchell Macpherson.
Take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Mr. Macpherson, you were the headmaster of Treloar's College from 1974 until 1990.
Yes.
And you then retired in 1990.
Yes.
And prior to that, I think you'd worked in various educational roles from 1961 through to 1974.
Yes.
Had any of the other schools at which you worked been schools with a significant proportion of pupils with physical disabilities?
No.
So Treloar's was different in that respect from everyone else?
Yes, completely different, yes.
And what did you know about Treloar's before you took up your role as headmaster?
Almost nothing.
How did the different nature of the pupil cohorts at Treloar's affect your role and responsibilities?
Well, obviously there were physical things you had to take into account, but my principle was always to try and run the school the same as any other school I'd been at in my career, and run it like an ordinary, make it as ordinary as possible, and treat the pupils as we had treated pupils in any other school I was in. We tried to make it ordinary and the same as anywhere else.
Now, I think before you moved into working in education, you'd spent a period of time in the Royal Navy.
Yes.
One of those doctors who was associated with the school was Surgeon Rear Admiral Rainsford. Did you know anything of him in the Navy, or what was his reputation and work in the Navy?
No, when I was in the Navy, I never met him, and I didn't know anything about him then. But of course, when I went to Treloar, I got to know him very well. He used to come to dinner quite often in my house, and we spoke on many occasions. He was a very fine man, very clever man.
Well, I'll come back to some of his work and the work of some of the other doctors at a later stage of your evidence. You were employed, I think, technically by the trust, the Treloar Trust.
Yes.
And it was the trust that owned the land and the establishment, and was ultimately responsible for the school and the college.
Yes, the trust owned it. There were trustees who I suppose were the legal owners, and the governors were governed. The trustees were all governors as well. So it was mainly administered through the governing body. The trust were mainly to do with finances.
And we'll look at a handful of examples of governing body minutes at a later stage this morning, but generally speaking, how often did the governing body meet?
I think it was once a month.
In terms of the organisation of the school, our understanding is that in 1974, when you took up your post, the Lord Mayor Treloar College was at Froyle at that stage, and the Florence Treloar School for Girls was based at Hollybourne.
Yes.
And then a few years in around 1978, they merged to become a co-educational establishment.
Yes, that's correct. We amalgamated the two schools, which is probably one of the most useful and the most important and the most worthwhile things that ever happened in the whole history of the school. It led to to a huge number of improvements and possibilities.
And at that point then, the upper school, which I think was generally referred to as the college, was then at Hollybourne and the lower school at Froyle.
Yes.
And then is it right to understand that there were a number of boarding houses, and each boarding house would have a housemaster or care manager, as I think they later
Yes, we had, when we amalgamated and became co-ed, we made the boarding houses all mixed. So they were boys and girls in every boarding house. And each house was run by a housemaster or a housemistress. It happened that they were all men to start with, but later on we found some house-mistresses to run the houses, yes. And a lot of care staff. They had a deputy and quite a big team under them, and night nurses.
Now, I'll come on to the haemophilia centre in a moment, but in terms of the health needs, the medical nursing needs of those pupils who did not have haemophilia, you had a college medical officer who was Dr. Pat Tomlinson.
Yes.
And very broadly speaking, how would the health needs, the medical needs of the non-haemophiliac patients be organised and met?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
So if all the children who were at the school had physical disabilities or physical illnesses of some kind or another, if we leave aside for a moment the care...
I didn't mean to say that they were ill or I mean, they were, and most of the time, they were actually quite healthy.
But from time to time, if we leave aside the treatment for haemophilia for the moment, from time to time, pupils might have needs for healthcare or medical intervention.
Oh, yes.
So for those who are not haemophiliacs, how would they get that healthcare?
Well, same as in any other school. We had it was called a sick bay to start with, and then of course PC makes you change the names of things, and it became the health centre with a charge nurse who was originally known as a sister but became a charge nurse in charge, and he or she looked after any pupils who were not well, and if he or she needed needed help, they would call in the doctor, Dr. Tomlinson.
Now, in terms of the haemophilia centre, did you or the school or college or the trust have any oversight over or involvement in the running of the haemophilia centre?
Yes, we did. It was it probably could never work today, but we were very fortunate. We had very broad-minded people involved, and we all got on well. And I don't think there were ever any rules laid down, but it was something that had to be run for the benefit of the boys with haemophilia. And so we had Dr. Arnstam and his assistant, who were employed by the NHS. They were not employed by us. And we had our sister in there, and all the nurses, and of course the physios and the occupational therapists and so on as well. And most of them, I think there was some contribution to their salary from the NHS, but I can't remember the details. But all these people worked together in the haemophilia centre, and there was never any question of, this is my job, this is your job, don't interfere here, or I do this and you don't do that, and I do this. I never ever heard anyone say any of these things, and people just got on with it. We were very, very lucky, actually, I suppose, looking back. But I don't think there was any problem over who did what.
And so your recollection is Dr. Arenstam, Dr. Wassef
Yes.
would it have been, were employed by the NHS.
That's right.
The nursing staff, I think there was Sister Turk, is that right? No, I've got that wrong, I think.
Yes, yes, Sister Turk, to start with, yes.
And then there were a number of other nurses.
Yes.
There were those involved in delivering various forms of physiotherapy,
Yes,
occupational
yes.
therapy. They were employed, as far as you can recall, by the trust, were they?
I think so. I think we employed them, but we certainly did not employ Dr. Wasif and Dr. Arenstam.
When the centre moved into the college grounds, which I think was around 1979, as I understand it. Previously, it had been based at the Lord Mayor Treloar Hospital. Do you know how that was funded, the actual setting up of the centre itself?
I think that was probably funded by the trust.
The Treloar Trust?
Yes, because it remained our property.
Was there, as far as you can recall, ever any contribution either at that stage or when refurbishments were required from any pharmaceutical company or any other third party?
I don't think so, but there may have been. I don't think so.
And then in terms of the broader funding of the school, before, again, we'll come back to the Haemophilia Centre in more detail, placements of individual pupils were largely funded by local educational authorities, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. There were just a small number paid for by their parents privately, but that was a very tiny number.
And were there any other sources of funding that the school had?
Well, we had an appeals department who brought in charitable money pretty regularly, but the trust was quite well off. It was reasonably well off in those days.
You've described the centre, the Haemophilia Centre, in your statement as a unique facility created by collaboration between the NHS and the college. Can you just expand on that a little more? You've told us of Dr. Arenstam, Dr. Wasaf being employed by the NHS. Apart from that, what was the nature of the collaboration?
Not sure what you mean.
Well, I'm just really trying to understand, when you referred in your statement to the centre, the Haemophilia Centre being created by collaboration between the NHS and the college, by collaboration do you mean that the NHS funding the involvement of the doctors?
Yes. Well, it was. It came about through discussion that we were shipping the boys to the hospital and back again, and this was a problem. And of course, when if they had a bleed which necessitated bed rest, then they would miss lessons. And it was obvious that if they could have this treatment in the school grounds, then they could probably go in a wheelchair to lessons, or the teacher could go and give them what to do in the sick bay, or the health centre, if you call it that. So I mean, it was just through discussion it became obvious that this would be an enormous improvement for the boys who suffered from haemophilia. And I suppose that was how it came about, just through discussion. Is that what you mean?
Yes. And then we've mentioned Dr. Arenstam, and again I'll ask you some more about him in a moment. But before Dr. Arenstam became the director of the centre, which was in around 1977, the centre, then based I think at the hospital, had been directed by Dr. Arblaster. Did you have much to do with him?
Not a lot, no, because I don't think he ever came to the school.
Other than Dr. Arenstam, Dr. Wasef, Dr. Arblaster, Dr. Rainsford, can you recall any of the other doctors who worked either at the Haemophilia Centre or were involved with the care of the boys with haemophilia?
Yes, we had, the doctor, when I first went there, it wasn't Pat Tomlinson, who was our medical officer. It was, I can't remember his name.
We've seen some reference to a Dr. McCardy.
That's right, McCardy. That was the man. Yes, Dr. McCardy. He'd been in the RAF as a medical officer, and came from there to us. He was a very nice chap, but he didn't stay long. And then he was replaced by someone called Dr. Painter, or Painter, I think it was, who stayed a very, very short time, which really infuriated our chairman of governors, because, who was the consultant orthopedic surgeon at the hospital. I think he only stayed 1 year, but Dr. McHardy was there a year or two.
And then we've seen reference in a number
Dr. McHardy was much more involved was very much involved with the haemophiliacs, whereas when Pat Tomlinson took over, by that time I think we were into talking about Haemophilia Centre, and she did not have any responsibility for the treatment of haemophilia. She was looking after the health, the general health of everyone.
And then we've seen some reference in documents to Dr. Kirk, Dr. Peter Kirk.
Yes.
Do you have any recollection of his?
Yes. He was a young chap. He was a very nice young chap. He was involved in the Haemophilia Centre. Yes, and I suppose he worked at the hospital as well.
Can I then just ask you a little more about Dr. Rainsford and what you recall about his involvement and his work? Do you think you say in your statement you can't recall who Dr. Rainsford was employed by? Is that right?
No, I've no idea. He may have been employed by us, but I couldn't tell you.
We know he was involved in research, and I'll ask you a little later on this morning about research, but do you recall whether from your dealings with Dr. Rainsford at the school or through him attending your house for dinner and the conversations you'd had, can you recall what his role at the school and college was by the time you were appointed in 1974?
Well, I think you've got to consider the history of the treatment of haemophilia, and he was at the sharp end of introducing better treatment for haemophilia, and he was, to certain, I suppose, experimenting in a way with the use of factor VIII, because haemophilia is, I'm not a doctor, but haemophilia, they used to call it the royal disease because Queen Victoria had an element of it in her family. And of course, if you go back far enough, there was no treatment for haemophilia at all. If you had a bleed, if a boy had a bleed, it just bled, and you would have to wrap it up, and it must have been very, very painful. And these bleeds would be caused by boys are naturally active people, and they run around, they want to kick balls and they want to climb trees and things, and so they get bleeds. And these bleeds were very serious if they weren't treated, and just wrapping them up with a bandage was not really enough to cure them. And I think in the old days, haemophiliacs probably died in their teens, just for want of treatment, internal bleeds and so on. So this introduction of giving them factor VIII, which made the blood clot, was a wonderful thing, and it was just absolutely tragic that some of it was infected.
We know.
Is that what you were wanting to know?
No,
So he was Dr. Anstam, Dr. Admiral Rainsford's work was dealing with this new idea, new treatment, and I don't know. I didn't really discuss with him much what he was doing. He would tell me bits about it, but a lot of it I didn't understand anyway. So there we go.
Is this right? You had a sense that he'd been instrumental in introducing treatment with
Yes, I
factor
think
concentrations?
that's what he was doing. He was trying. I suppose my guess is that he was trying to work out about quantities of factor VIII required, prophylactic treatment, which I think nowadays that's what they all have, and thanks to him and people like him, I mean, there's absolutely no need for haemophiliacs to go to a special school anymore. I'm sure I think they all just stay at home and they treat themselves, or their mother treats them, which is great.
And do you recall when Dr. Rainsford left working in the college or in the school?
You mean what year?
Yes.
No, I don't remember.
You mentioned in your statement, or you put it this way, that he worked freely anywhere in the college. Can you help us with what you meant by that?
Did I say that? Well, I don't think. I'm not sure what I meant by that. Did I say that?
Yes, you did.
Well, I suppose what I meant was that he was, like all staff, he was welcome anywhere he went. I suppose he wasn't really working in other departments of the college, though, was he? Come to think of it. So I'm not sure that was... I'm not sure what I meant by that. No, I don't know what I meant by that. You're taking it out of context.
No, it was simply a question to try and understand what you meant.
Yes,
If you
all
can't
right,
add to
all
it,
right.
then you can't add to it. Now, did you have any involvement in the appointment of Dr. Aronstam
No.
as centre director?
No.
So that was the decision taken
Well,
by the NHS?
he was entirely NHS.
Does it follow from the fact that he was employed by
But
the
when we were appointing people like Sister Turk or other nurses, Dr. Arnstam would be involved in that interview. So we would bring him in, although we were paying for this nurse, we would bring him in to make sure he was happy.
And does it follow from the fact that Dr. Aronstam and I think your recollection is Dr. Wassef were employed by the NHS, that you had no, as it were, line management responsibility for them? They didn't report to you as their boss, essentially?
No, they definitely did not. But, I mean, Dr. Wassef used to come and have coffee with me once a week on a regular basis. And I saw Dr. Wassef. Did I say Dr. Wassef? Dr. Arnstam came, and Dr. Wassef, I used to see him a lot as well. But we had a regular meeting with Dr. Arnstam, which for the most part was just to say how are things and have a cup of coffee and so on. But sometimes we would sit and discuss something at length if there was a problem or something he wanted to tell me about.
Can you recall, Dr. Aronstam, whether at these sort of weekly coffee meetings or at any other time, reporting any particular problems to you? Or?
Well, he would tell me about any boy who was having a serious problem at that time, who was ill, who was getting, who was suffering from, I don't know, because hepatitis affects, is it the liver it affects? I don't know much about it really, but he would tell me about someone who was in pain and uncomfortable, and we should be careful that the staff ought to realise that this boy was not well. Things like that.
Did he ever, or did he, as in Dr. Aronstam or any of the other doctors, ever discuss with you what their policy or approach was to treatment?
What do you mean by that?
So would he discuss with you, for example, the use of treatment on a prophylactic basis, or the use of commercial products or anything along those lines?
Well, when you say discuss, discuss would not be the word. He would be telling me that this is what they were doing, because I mean, I had nothing to do with making any decisions in the medical side of running things. But I was usually made aware of what was going on, and I was kept informed, I think, very well by the staff. But I would definitely not have any part in making any decisions.
And do you recall Dr. Arenstam ever discussing with you or mentioning to you the fact that he was using a lot of commercial factor concentrates from American pharmaceutical companies rather than solely using NHS factor concentrates? Did that ever come
I don't remember that.
This is maybe a hypothetical question, but if you had concerns about, say, what Dr. Arenstam was doing, with whom would you have raised that?
With my chairman of governors.
Do you recall you ever having to do that?
No. Absolutely not. I always had total faith in all the doctors.
Can you just help us then more broadly? Again, I want to come back to some more specific issues about haemophilia, but in terms of the admission process, admissions to the school, how in broad terms did that process work in the 70s and 80s?
Well, we would receive a request from a local education authority for a place for a particular boy or girl, and they would fill in a form which gave us details about them, and then we would invite the parents with the boy or girl to come and visit and spend most of a day looking around and meeting me, meeting the housemaster, one of the housemasters or housemistress, and so that they would be able to assess the care needs and, if necessary, one of the medical staff, so they could assess what was required, and if they were severely disabled, they would meet the occupational therapist as well, and people like that. So it would be a two-way assessment for us to assess them, to make sure we could cope with them, and we could provide the education and the care they needed, and also to make sure that they were happy coming to our school.
And in terms of the admission...
Is that what you wanted to know?
Yes, and then in terms of the admission of pupils with haemophilia, did that work in the same way, or was there a different process?
No, it was just the same. I would think that, I can't remember the details, but I would imagine that Dr. Arenstam was pretty well, he knew most of the other haemophilia centres in Britain, and he would probably know the doctor involved, and he probably got details from the haemophilia centre as well. But basically, no, there was no great difference there, except, I mean, the haemophiliacs were not really, they weren't a care problem. They were able to look after themselves.
And then in terms of for the haemophilia pupils, most or all of whom would have been under the care of a haemophilia centre close to their home, we've seen plenty of examples of communication between Dr. Arenstam and the home haemophilia centre. Did you ever have much involvement in dialogue yourself with the home haemophilia centre?
No, that would be a medical matter.
If in terms of any member of staff wanting to raise concerns about anything that was happening at the school, but in particular the care or treatment of any of the pupils at the haemophilia centre, do you think staff who had concerns would have been able to raise that with you freely? Was I don't mean quite whistleblowing, but was there an atmosphere of staff being able to come to you and say that they had concerns?
Oh, I think so. Yes, we had my life was just meeting after meeting after meeting, and we met. They met one another. They met with me. They met with the doctor, and I don't think anyone would have difficulty raising a concern if they wanted to.
And if Dr. Arenstam had had concerns about either individual pupils or bigger concerns about whether he was taking the right approach in terms of treatment, would he have been able to raise those kind of concerns?
Oh, he
with
did.
you?
Oh, yes, he did. I mean, he would come and tell me, and you've got in there a note about a meeting I had once with all the doctors, and they came to see me to say, look, you've got to stop the boys playing football. And I mean, that was a bit of a shock. Can you imagine a headmaster having to stop pupils playing football? This is one of the things they loved. It was really quite horrific, actually. And yes, they came and told me. They said, you've got to stop them because they're getting too many bleeds. It's in their own interests, and so we had to do something about it, which was quite that raised a lot of problems.
Well, just on that particular issue, can you recall whether anything more was said to you about the reasons for stopping football, or was it just to try and reduce the number of bleeds, as far as you recall?
What do you mean? What more would they be saying?
Well, was anything said to you about what the knock-on consequences might be for the use of concentrates and expenditure on factor concentrates, for example, by the centre?
Not sure what you're getting at.
Was anything raised with you about whether resources were having to be spent by the haemophilia centre?
You mean to save money? We had to
Yes.
stop them playing football
Yes.
to save money?
Yes.
I don't think that came into it. Not in my mind. It was the welfare of the boys, and stop them getting bleeds in mainly in their knees, of course, and that was the main thing, I would say. I don't remember anyone ever saying to me, "This is costing us far too much money. You've got to stop them playing football because it's costing us an extra money." I don't remember that ever coming up at all, and I doubt if it would. I think they were more interested in the welfare of the boys rather than finances.
And given that the ethos of the school, as you've described it in part, was to try and allow people to live as normal and active a life as possible.
That's what we tried to do.
Do you recall whether you were surprised at the haemophilia clinicians coming to you and asking you to stop football?
Well, it was a bit of a shock, obviously, because and it certainly caused us problems. But I mean, if that was the medical opinion, I was perfectly happy to support them, and so were the staff. We went out of our way to help to make this work.
Now you've made clear in your statement, in your evidence this morning, that the medical decisions upon how to treat the boys for their haemophilia, what concentrates, for example, to use, in what volume, how often, those were all decisions for the haemophilia doctors, and you did not get involved in those decisions?
No.
What, if anything, can you recall was your understanding of any risks associated with that treatment? Do you recall, for example, understanding that there were risks of hepatitis?
Do you mean before it happened?
Well, really, at any point during your headmastership from 1974 onwards, do you recall learning about hepatitis being a possible consequence of treatment with factor concentrates?
Well, obviously, I did learn about it because they told me that unfortunately some of the blood was contaminated and some of the boys had been infected. Is that what you mean?
Do you recall who told you about hepatitis?
I can't recall actual specific meetings, but it would be Dr. Arnstam, undoubtedly.
And
It may have been. I mean, the nurse would. I mean, the sister quite possibly was the first one to tell me that she had concerns about it, that this was in the air, and that they were beginning to wonder about it. But you're going back over 40 years. It's a long time ago.
yes, I absolutely understand that. What, if anything, can you recall about conversations with Sister Turk about that?
Well, I don't remember exact specific conversations, but I know we definitely had conversations about it, and it was just concern. It was just, this is a big worry.
We've had some evidence about there being an outbreak of hepatitis in around 1974, 1975, with a number of boys being infected. It may have been called serum hepatitis, might have been the term used. Do you recall that quite early on in your headmastership? Do you recall an outbreak of hepatitis taking place?
Well, I remember the problems it caused because we had obviously hepatitis. I think most of us really knew nothing about it until this came about, and then we heard about it. We heard that some of the boys were infected, and of course this was concerning, very worrying, worrying for the parents, and worrying for the care staff who had to look after them, because none of us really knew how infectious this was, and that certainly caused a lot of anxiety. And I remember we had to. This is where Pat Tomlinson came in, actually. Although no, it wasn't her. If you're talking about the early one, 1974, she wasn't there yet. This was when the Dr. McHardy or someone would have meetings with the staff and talk to them about it and explain what the dangers were. And we were fairly well reassured that this was not something that was all that easily transmitted to other people, except through specific.
One of the former pupils who's given evidence to the inquiry has a recollection in relation to this specific outbreak of hepatitis in the mid-1970s of the headmaster, presumably you, or given the time, addressing the school in an assembly or in a meeting, saying there are two types of hepatitis, the fatal kind and the non-fatal kind, and this is the non-fatal kind, and it's not something to worry about. Do you have any recollection of that?
I'm sure that happened. I would certainly talk to the school about it because they had to be told.
And your understanding of whether hepatitis was serious or of different types of hepatitis, you'd have got your information from
Oh yes,
the
yeah.
doctors.
I don't. I'm not a doctor.
Can you remember
We had to contact parents as well, of course, and tell them about it.
Well, I'm going to come on to the question of
Yeah, all right,
contact,
all right.
Mr. Macpherson, in a few minutes. Can you remember, I'm moving on now from the mid-70s to the early 1980s, 82, 83, 84. Can you remember how you first became aware of AIDS and the possibility that AIDS could be transmitted through the use of blood products to haemophiliacs?
You mean who told me?
Yes.
Well, it would be Dr. Arnstam.
And have you got any? I know it's a long time ago, Mr. Macpherson, but have you got any recollection of what must have been very shocking information of him telling you about that and what he said?
Well, of course, we had to discuss it and discuss what we were going to do about it, with not just with the boys involved, but with the whole school, because it affected the whole school, and we had numerous discussions at governors' meetings about it as well. I mean, it was a pretty massive shock to find that you had this in the school among a group of pupils, and it was something that really none of us had much idea about. We didn't know about it. I mean, AIDS was something that you thought was in Central Africa, and then you heard that the United States was troubled by it, but we never expected to have it under our roof.
So it was, you think, Dr. Arnstam who would have first brought it to your attention?
Well, it had to be. I mean, who else could have done it?
I'll look later with you at some records of governors' meetings from 1985 onwards, at which how the school should deal with this is discussed. Again, I know these are a number of years ago, but do you have any sense of how long before that, before 85, when the governing body started to talk about it, Dr. Arnstam alerted you to the situation?
Oh, it did. We would immediately start working on it. There would be no time delay there. I mean, this was too serious. Our policy was never to sweep things under the carpet. We would start working on what to do straight away. There was no question of delay. I mean, it was really quite worrying. This is a very worrying thing, because I mean, a lot of staff were terrified that they were going to get it, and of course you had a lot of boy-girl relationships. Normally, you have in any co-ed school. Fathers of daughters at the school were coming to see me. I mean, it was a massive problem.
So if, for example, we see it being discussed by the governing body really, I think, properly for the first time in 1985, is the right inference to draw from that you've been alerted to the problem only relatively shortly before that?
Yes, I think so.
And so we know, for example, from individual medical records of pupils, and I understand you wouldn't have seen those records, but we know that Dr. Arnstam was looking for what he called the stigmata of AIDS in pupils and was carrying out what he called AIDS-related investigations and tests in the first half of 1983. Do you recall him telling you about that?
No, I mean, I think if he'd told me that this was something that he was worried about, we would have taken action straight away. We would have started doing something about it. I'm pretty sure that we didn't hang around when we heard about it. So are you saying that he knew about it for a while and kept quiet about it?
Well, that's one of the matters that the inquiry will have to consider.
I can't help you with that.
Can I then just come to the general topic of parental involvement with the the
Of the what?
parental involvement,
Yes,
the involvement of parents
Yes.
with the school. So I'm going to ask you generally, and then ask you more specifically about the families of the boys with haemophilia. What, as far as you can recall, generally was the parental involvement on a termly or annual basis with the school? What kind of communication would there be between the school and parents?
Well, I would say virtually the same as any other boarding school, but probably a bit closer in terms of the boarding houses. Parents used to come and talk to the housemasters and the care staff pretty regularly, and I know that the housemasters had a pretty close relationship with a lot of the parents.
We've seen some examples of there being school reports, unsurprisingly, sent home in relation to the pupils, which would deal with the various different academic subjects. And we've seen examples then of there being, for the haemophilia boys, a small medical report. So-and-so's had bleeds, had some prophylactic treatment, has had a good term, along those lines, and perhaps a physiotherapy report. Did you have any involvement with the putting together of the medical or physiotherapy reports that went to the pupils?
No.
And would you expect to have seen those reports?
Well, I expect I would see them if I wanted to, if it was a report going out to the parents. But I mean, I didn't have time to read all things like that, unless there was some reason for me to read it.
What was your expectation of how the kind of information that would be given to parents about the treatment of their children, the medical treatment of their children? If there was a medical issue, a medical concern, a requirement for ongoing treatment, would you expect the parents to be told about that?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
In relation to the pupils who were not under the care of the haemophilia centre, who would be responsible for telling parents about their child's treatment? Would it be you or Dr. Tomlinson?
No, it wouldn't be me. I think Pat Tomlinson was pretty good in this respect. She would ring up the parents or arrange to see them if it was anything serious. But if it was something minor, I mean, if it, I think in general, if a pupil went into sick bay with a bad cold or something like that, the nurse would ring the parents and just tell them what was happening, so they knew what was happening. I would have said they were kept in touch, but I don't know about the haemophilia side of it really.
So, in relation to the haemophilia centre, would it have been the responsibility of Dr. Arenstam or the staff at the centre to keep parents informed about their son's health?
Yes.
And as far as you understood, did you think that was happening, that parents were being kept up to date?
I don't remember anyone ever complaining at any time about it.
The evidence the inquiries both heard and read shows very little contact, and what we've seen so far, between the haemophilia centre and parents. Does that surprise you?
That surprises me, yes.
In terms of consent to treatment, I'll ask you just to look at a couple of documents, I think, and then I'll ask you some questions about it. So I'm going to ask you, first of all, generally, there's a form it'll come up on the screen in front of you, Mr. Macpherson, TREL 40165_053. So this is a document from 1976. It's addressed to you as headmaster, and then it says, as the parent of, and we've redacted the name of the pupil. This happens to be a pupil with haemophilia. currently a pupil at Lord Mayor Treloar College, I hereby authorise the school medical officer, which would have been the Dr McCarty, Dr Tomlinson role as I understand it, whenever he deems appropriate, to discuss with one or more governors and or the headmaster, or in the absence of the headmaster, his deputy or my child's housemaster, information containing the health of the said pupil. And then it says, and in the event of an illness to the said pupil, I hereby authorise any one governor or the headmaster, or in the absence of the headmaster, his deputy or my child's housemaster acting under the advice of the school medical officer, to sanction such action as the school medical officer deems necessary and appropriate in the circumstances, including the authorisation of the use of anaesthetics and or a major surgical operation in the event of an emergency. I give this authority unconditionally, and it's understood that should either the use of anaesthetics or major surgery be deemed expedient, every reasonable endeavour will be made to obtain my permission before proceeding. And I hereby authorise one or more of the governors or the headmaster or my child's housemaster or the school medical officer to sanction vaccination, revaccination, immunisation or inoculation of the pupil when deemed appropriate by the school medical officer. As far as you can recall, was this document or this kind of document completed for all children?
Sorry, say that again?
Was this document or this type of document completed in relation to all children in the 70s, as far as you can recall?
I think so, yes.
And this seems in part to be designed to allow the school legally to treat a child in an emergency.
Yeah, I mean, at previous schools I'd been at, you've got something similar to this. It's pretty well essential, because if a child has an accident or is seriously ill, requiring urgent treatment, you're not going to hang around while you try to contact the parents, are you? They wouldn't want you to. So I think I remember things like this happening when I was a housemaster in a previous school. I had to sign things, and that's pretty well the norm, I would say.
So we can see this document, as you say, it caters for you being able to, or the school being able to arrange treatment in a real emergency.
Yes.
It's permission in relation to vaccination and inoculation programmes, and it allows there to be discussions about the child's health between members of staff. In terms of the ongoing treatment of pupils with haemophilia, who, unlike perhaps some at the school, would have required or would have been likely to receive treatment on an ongoing basis, were there any other forms or documents or discussions about parents giving consent that you were aware of? Or was that a matter for the haemophilia centre to sort out?
Well, that would be the haemophilia centre, yes.
So, again, I'm going to just ask you about a sort of a hypothetical example in relation to the treatment of a pupil with haemophilia. If Dr. Arenstam or one of the other clinicians at the haemophilia centre was proposing, for example, to give the child a range of different types of factor concentrates, perhaps different from what they'd had previously or in greater volume from what they'd had previously, would you expect Dr. Arenstam to have discussed that with the parents?
To discuss it with the parents? I don't know. That's a medical matter, really. I think you would have to talk to a doctor about that one.
So would this be right to understand then you'd have regarded that as an issue to be resolved between the centre and the
that's a medical matter. He wouldn't want me interfering in medical matters, and I would not want him interfering in matters regarding discipline. I mean, the two, we each had our own areas to look after.
But bearing in mind that you and the school were effectively in loco parentis for the children whilst they were there during term time, Did it ever occur to you to check with Dr. Arenstam or with other staff at the centre that they were keeping parents fully informed of what was happening?
I couldn't tell you. I can't remember what happened in that respect. I find it, if I had ever had any parent say to me that they didn't know what was going on or they weren't happy about something, I would certainly have investigated it. As far I do not remember any incident where that ever happened. Not in the whole time I was there. I don't remember that ever happening. And I think I feel that if they had a genuine concern, I feel parents would have said either to me or to housemaster or to the nurse, the sister, or talking to a physio, because the parents did talk to them. I think they would have said.
And when you say the parents did talk to them, how often, typically, would parents physically attend the school? Was there an occasion each term at which parents were invited to come?
Well, they would come on occasions to collect their pupils and so on, but I think there was quite a lot of telephoning went on between the nurses and the parents to keep them informed. But I couldn't really answer that one.
And then if we just look at one other example of a consent form, it's TREL 40249_065. Not got that? Let me give you another one. I've got several examples. TREL 0000295_453. So this is just an example, Mr. Macpherson. If we look at the bottom half of the page, again, we've redacted the individual pupil's name, but it's a haemophilia pupil, and we can see reference there to Dr. Wassef. And it says, I, and then it's your name, hereby consent to the submission of pupil's name to the operation of left knee aspiration under local anaesthetic, the nature and effect of which have been explained to me by Dr. Wassef. I also consent to such further or alternative operative measures as may be found to be necessary during the course of the operation and the administration of a general, local or other anaesthetic for any of these purposes. And we can see this one happens to be dated November 1981. Was it often that you were asked to give these kind of consents?
When you say often, what would you call often?
Well, do you have a recollection of how common it was?
Well, it wasn't uncommon. I mean, if they needed something done like this, Dr. Wassef would come and, as far as I can remember, he would bring the form in and say, and explain what was going on and say, we need a signature. And I was quite happy to sign it because I trusted him.
Again, I'm not asking you about any individual case or expecting you to remember individual cases, Mr. Macpherson, but would you, if you're signing this kind of form, would you assume that there had been an attempt to contact the parents first and that they were only coming to you because they'd been unable to get hold of a parent, or were you the first line of person to sign and they didn't go to the parent?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
Do you think you would have asked if they'd contacted the parents if there was going to be some form of either local or general anaesthetic?
I don't remember.
Do you ever recall there being any disagreement or difference of approach between the way in which the haemophilia centre cared for and interacted with pupils and parents and the school medical officer and the general nursing staff?
No.
You've told us, I think, Dr. Tomlinson didn't get involved in the care of a treatment of haemophilia. She might, I think, have become involved if she was treating a boy with haemophilia for some other general medical problem. Is that right?
Yes.
Were there ever, as far as you can recall, discussions across all the medical staff about the best way to treat any of the pupils with haemophilia?
Sorry, are you saying was Dr. Tomlinson ever involved with the treatment of haemophilia, or discussing treatment of haemophilia?
Yes, was she ever involved, as far as you know, in discussions with the haemophilia centre staff about the treatment?
Well, I mean, she must have been. She would go every time she was came to the college. She would be. The haemophilia centre was really in the sick bay in the health centre, and so and it was the same sister who was dealing with both departments. So she couldn't I mean, she couldn't have avoided doing that, could she? I don't think. I mean, that's just had to happen.
Now, there came a point in time when pupils at the school were tested for what we now call HIV, but was then referred to as HTLV3, and a number of the pupils had positive test results. In other words, they'd been infected with HTLV3, the virus that was known could lead to AIDS. Can you recall what was said to you by Dr. Arenstam about that? So not just now, not the general risk of AIDS, but the actual knowledge that boys at the school had been infected.
Well, he told me. I'm not sure what you mean by this.
I'm just trying to understand what you can recall about any conversations with Dr. Arenstam, how and when he told you that boys under your care, the school's care, had been infected.
Well,
with HIV.
he came and told me that this was the situation. What I'm not sure what you're getting at.
Well, I'm simply trying to probe what your recollection is of what he told you. Again, I know it's a number of years ago. So he told you boys had tested positive, did
Yes.
he? I know in your statement you couldn't say how many boys had tested positive, but at the time, would he have told you how many boys?
I can't remember.
Do you recall knowing...
He probably would. I mean, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't, but I don't remember.
And do you recall whether you were told which boys had tested positive?
I don't recall, but I probably was.
Did you have any involvement, or your staff have any involvement in the process of telling boys their test results?
No.
So that was the responsibility
Oh, yes.
of Dr. Arenstam and his staff.
Yes.
We've heard some evidence that suggests that there were possibly quite significant delays in pupils being told their test result. Did Dr. Arenstam ever discuss with you that process, or
No.
why he might delay?
No idea.
And then we've heard and read quite a lot of evidence which suggests that many parents were not told by the haemophilia centre of their son's infection with HTLV3. Does that surprise you?
That very much surprises me, yes.
What would your expectation have been of what should happen in terms of telling parents?
Well, I would have thought they'd be told immediately.
And did you ever, as far as you can recall, ask Dr. Arenston what?
I don't remember, but I mean, I would I would just assume that he had. I know we had to. We wrote. I can remember writing a letter, which went out to all the parents pretty soon after this happened, to tell them about the AIDS in the school and explain a bit about it. I think it was written by me and by Pat Tomlinson. It may have been signed by Pat Tomlinson, not by me. I can't remember now. But anyhow, I'm sure we did a general letter to inform them of what was going on, so that they would have some idea of what was happening. But I can't remember what the Haemophilia Centre did individually.
And am I right in understanding that general letter that you're talking about?
Yeah, that wouldn't mention any names.
Yes, it would have been a letter to all parents, not just parents of
No,
haemophilia
that
boys.
went out to every parent of.
Because it was now known that some had
Yes,
been infected,
yeah.
and you were trying to provide reassurance to all.
Yes.
What, if anything, can you recall about the support arrangements for boys who were being given this devastating diagnosis? Do you know what was done to provide support to them?
Well, I don't know what was done in the medical side, but I know that the care staff took this on, and and the nurses took it on, and I'm sure the physios as well. But I think the care staff would bear the biggest brunt, because they would, it's the sort of thing that going to bed at night, the boy would be all upset and chat to his house mother about it. Most of our house parents were married women who lived in Alton, and most of them had children of their own. And they saw this as they were horrified, and they were desperate to help in any way, to listen to them, to talk to them, whatever they could do. I would think that was their biggest. That was the best place for them to get help. But help on the medical side, I couldn't tell you about.
Your statement
But
makes
the emotional side was probably the worst side of all, and of course we had a lot of trouble with behaviour.
Your statement makes reference to there being a counsellor and a consultant psychiatrist.
we had I think we had two counsellors, and we had a psychiatrist who came and visited once a week. And if there was anyone with serious problems, we would refer them to the psychiatrist. But there were very, very few went to the psychiatrist. The counsellor saw quite a number of pupils. I think Pat Tomlinson dealt with that. I didn't tend to. They weren't referred to her by me. That was Pat Tomlinson. I mean, I would have referred one if I wanted to, but I wouldn't know the details. I mean, I'm not. I wouldn't be able to know enough about that.
The arrangement in relation to the consultant psychiatrist, as I understand your statement and your evidence, that wasn't a specific arrangement made in response to the AIDS situation.
No, it wasn't. No, and I don't remember. I don't remember it being. No, it wasn't. No.
And in terms of the counsellors, again, though there were not specific counsellors brought in to counsel the boys.
No, we had counsellors for. I mean, quite a lot of our pupils were very upset about their condition and so on, and so they got help, professional help through them. But this was, this was there. It was already there.
The inquiry has a statement from one of the housemasters, Mr. Scott. We haven't troubled you with it, but he suggests that there was a lack of, when this happened, when this arose and it was learnt that pupils at the school had been infected with HIV, there was a lack of training to enable the staff to offer psychological support to these pupils. Would you accept that?
Well, I mean, how do you train someone to give that sort of help?
Do you know whether anyone at the school, Dr. Tomlinson, Dr. Arenston, yourself, any of your staff, contacted any external organisations asking for help as to how to assist the boys best?
I don't think so, no.
So I note the time. I've still got a few questions of my own for Mr. Macpherson, but I'm conscious he's been going for an hour and a quarter and everyone might want to break in any event.
Yes. Well, we'll take a break to enable those who are maybe listening remotely to give you some questions if they have any, because I appreciate you may not have much more to ask.
I don't have a huge amount more, but I was sent some questions overnight that I haven't had a chance properly to look through. So could we take a slightly longer break than normal, and that will enable people to suggest further questions as well?
We'll do that. So we'll come back at 12 o'clock. Give you long enough, do you think?
That would be ample.
Very well. Now, Mr. Macpherson, you're giving evidence. What I say to all witnesses, it applies to you as it does exactly to others, is you mustn't talk to anyone during the break about the evidence you have given or anything which you think you may yet be asked about. You can talk about anything else you like. So, 12 o'clock, if you please.
Thank you, sir.